were speaking at the conference about the conference and some of the presentations, particularly the Deputy Minister, Dr. Henderson from UNCTAD. We were going to have Professor Snowball, who presented on some of the things that we've done, but she's done the study with Dr. Holmes, who's here, who will be speaking. Initially, we're going to have Professor Snowball. We have Unati Chava, the Executive Director at SACO. But I'll just do the quick introductions, and we have the DDG as well. So it's really just to give the opportunity for people to ask, and we'll send the presentations that will be made here via email, and some of the reports that are relevant to this presentation. So this morning, or this afternoon rather, we're meant to have the session in the morning. This afternoon, we have the Deputy Minister of Sport, Arts and Culture, Ms. Mafuno Notawe. She's been originally hailing from the Eastern Cape, and she's been a member of Parliament from about 2014, and she was also a member of the ad hoc committee on funding of political parties from about June 2017 until 2019, and she was a candidate of the ANC in Parliament, and then of course she holds the position of the Deputy Minister of Sport, Arts and Culture. We've got Dr. Marisa Henderson, who is the Chief of Trade and Creative Economy at the UNCTAD, which is the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. We've got Unati, as I've said, the Executive Director of SACO. We've got the DDG at Sport, Arts and Culture, Dr. Stella Kumalo. We've got Dr. Andre Hose, who's a researcher at SACO and was also part of the team that was conducting the research on the economic mapping on the South African creative industries. And so they will really just give the input on the specific aspects that they really spoke to during the session. And we're going to have the Deputy Minister really just to give some of the highlights. Some of you might have listened during the session, but there are some of you who were not in the session here physically, or who might have not attended the session virtually. So it's really just an opportunity to just give you a brief, about SACO, about the need for this conference, and really just some of the important interventions from the department. Deputy Minister, up to you.
Intellectuals who remain talking, but it's just to say, as the ministry in particular, we appreciate this conference because many of you understand that when we talk about the cultural creatives industries, many a times there is no scientific work, or there is no research that normally backs what we will talk about in terms of the role that they play in the economy. Now, what the work then that is being done by the South African Cultural Observatory is critical, in the sense that anybody then can be able to pull that work out and able to quantify what then is the cultural creatives role and what they are doing in the terms of economy of the country, how much they are contributing to the economy. When we talk about the gross domestic product, you put that into words, but also into numbers. And that's why then it's very critical this kind of doing so much, and therefore we are able to influence even the budgeting process based on what has been done. So we are really appreciating as government, even us as people that are deployed in sport, arts and culture, sometimes a department that most people see as a minor department. We are able to come up now with information and say this department is critical to the economy and building the economy of the country based on the information that is coming out.
Thank you so much. I'm not sure whether there might be questions now, or I should perhaps let me take questions for her before I go to the next speakers. It might be easier so that you don't forget the questions. If you can check for me online and people that are here, those that might have questions, please just give me an indication with your hand, then I'll give you an opportunity to ask. Yeah, and if you can just say your name, just introduce yourself. We have a roving mic. Can you just so for the benefit of the people that are online, just so that they can hear.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much, our esteemed Deputy Minister. I'm Nomonga Kumalo from a company called Grapefruit Gardens. We're a media tech company, and we are operating in the audiovisual sector. So you touched on a very important point earlier on when it came to government support, especially during COVID-19, and the necessary safety nets that were put in place. But our research, backed by the National Film and Video Foundation, shows that one of the stumbling blocks is effective administration skills. So compliance is a huge stumbling block when it comes to filmmakers specifically, and I can only speak on behalf of them, applying for these grants and accessing funding. I'd just like to know if the government and the department is aware of this, and if perhaps there are any if there's anything in place to remedy this problem. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ms. Kumalo. Very important question, because I think that question, what we actually say is that whilst government might put up resources to assess in that process, look at also how to skill people to make sure that out of the process of assessing, they also get skilled. I think DDG Kumalo at some point will get into the details, because that area falls under the details. But safe to say that yes, we are aware of those shortcomings. That's why at some point, when we were even looking at the application form, we had to simplify it, because most of the articles were even struggling to fill up, because it was at some point 5 pages. We had to put it into to make it easy for them to access that. So we are aware, but we also agree that as the department, we need to look at which organization can we work with to make sure that as we assist at this part, we also make sure that there is something that is going to get out. For instance, we asked to fill in NFDF, and we also asked NAC to put together programs that will skill that out of this we should be able, whilst we have assisted, but we have also taught them on digitization, we have also taught them on basic administration process, so that at the end, whilst we had given something that they did, but at the end we were able to
Thank you very much and good afternoon. The Deputy Minister Makuman, I think has addressed the question that you were asking. For me, I'm just going to be adding. Just to cite an example, the National Film and Video Foundation, because you made that specific example, upon allocation of the Presidential Employment Stimulus Program, the very recent one, or the very last phase that we are on now, they actually embarked, they were proactive, we believe, in embarking on these provincial potential awareness programs where on one-to-one they were able to engage with potential applicants and be able to then explain what was identified during phase 1 of the application process as key challenges and stumbling blocks. I think obviously not everyone comes to those awareness programs because we're still finding that there's still some of these compliance, as you indicated, compliance issues. So compliance in terms of pre, when you apply, but also post, because that is where people also do not realize that it creates a problem, because if you don't adhere to what you have submitted, post and you're submitting your report, it actually affects you when you come back and apply for any future funding, because it always comes back to that. Also lastly, Program Director, want to also indicate that in recognition of the fact that this particular area of skills development is quite critical, you will find that in our recently approved, that Deputy Minister was talking about, the Cultural and Creative Industry Master Plan, there are 9 key priority areas, and one of those key priority areas is the area of skills development, talking to enterprise development and other such capacity development programs. We are going the length and breadth of the country right now to make the industry and the creatives aware of the content of the CCI master plan, which we hope would assist in rolling out the plan. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kumar.
Just before you ask any other question, I just wanted, so that Kumalo knows. All booklets, so that to everybody must be able to pick up a booklet and understand what must happen. Please ask Makumalo, the senior, in a 6 months time, where are the booklets?
COVID. So SACO has done 4 research pieces on COVID, 2 for sport and 2 for the creative and cultural and creative industries. The first 2 were right after COVID hit, and then the other 2 a little bit later. So we know what the impact is. What we also did is we developed a vulnerability index. So that kind of measures which sectors are more precarious than the others. So from that research, we're busy right now looking at the precarity of the sector. Where is it most vulnerable? What are the issues that are adapting it? So at the end of this year and early next year, that report will be ready, and then hopefully we'll be able to share our research findings on that. But just from our other research, which is very important, is creatives are involved in the gig economy generally. Now the gig economy is not only for creatives, with technology it's splitting out, it's becoming more and more evident. And the gig economy has not been designed, the systems in place, the safety net, has not been designed for this gig economy. So we need to look at how things should change. So if you take, for example, a contract, so a person, an artist working in the gig economy will get an email or WhatsApp, and that's a contract. Whereas in the normal economy, it has to be signed by 36 people and read by dozens of lawyers. So we do look at that. And things like UIF, it's not always applicable. Skills levies are not always applicable. So hopefully, I don't think we're going to do it in this piece of research. Maybe we'll come out with some good findings. But we will point to the areas where there should be further research and further investigations done. So it's not as though it hasn't stopped. The research is carrying on.
I don't think
outcome. Actually, I have two questions. The first one is, how is government going to improve the way that they engage with the creative community? And another question is, are you going to see any policies formed as a result of this conference being implemented in the first 2 years? Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Perhaps, if you can take that, and after that we'll move to the next speaker, because of course the biggest issue of this conference we want to hear from the UNCTAD. But Deputy Minister.
Thanks so much, Nersia, for those two questions. I think the first one about the effective the engagement. I think you spoke about the engagement with the creative industry. I think the department has been trying to improve, for instance, on the engagement with the creative industry. We do know that there is an organization that's supposed to be, every creative is supposed to be a member of. I hope. You know? Nersia? Yes. Do you know that organization? What is it? What is the organization that every creative is supposed to be a member of? Stella, you can tell me. CSIR. Yes. So what then government is, because it's gonna be impossible to be engaging with individuals most of the time. So most of the communication is through CSIR with the creatives, because our understanding is that every creative person in the country is supposed to be a member of CSIR. That's one. But secondly, of course, we do release sometimes communication statements, whatever. But we really would want every creative to be a member of CSIR, because it makes it easy for the department to communicate better with the creatives, because it gets difficult when everybody wants to call us on Twitter, on social media about certain things that we must communicate with them, when in actual fact CSIR could do this or could do that on all of your behalf. Because then if we are not responding to CSIR, then you call us out to say, you said we must be member of CSIR, but you government are not actually even looking well after CSIR because of ABCD. We give funds to CSIR for you. You guys are not accessing them because you're not members of CSIR. Tomorrow, then you complain that we are not looking well after you, because we can't sometimes give funds individually to all of you. So that's why we had tried to say, organize yourselves into an organization which is going to be easy for government to communicate with. Same as sport. Athletes have got federations, and those federations then belong to SACO. Government interacts with SACO on all the issue of athletes, and SACO interacts with federations on if it's soccer, it's SAFA, if it's netball, it's Netball South Africa. It's not individual athletes, because it becomes impossible to do that. Your second question, which is about the policy that must come out of this, of course, there's already a policy, which is the Creative Master Plan. We need now to look at how we make sure that that policy becomes practical and implementable. That's what we need to do. That's why one of the big things is to make sure that every creative person has got access to that master plan, because that master plan is going to be able to help you to say, but government, here is the policy that you said you're going to do ABCD, and you are not doing it. That's why I was calling a DDG out to say those booklets must be ready in 6 months' time, so that every creative has got access to that policy. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kumalo.
Thank you, Morning. Just to add to what Deputy Minister is saying, there are two policies right now, national policies, that are under the process of development over and above the master plan and the revised white paper process. Those are the theatre and dance policy together with the books policy. So I'm talking here about those where the process has started, and we actually follow a consultative process in terms of development of these policies, where it's the sector itself that is part and parcel of the development of the policy. An example that I'm making of the theatre and dance policy involves provincial task teams nominated from the sector who sit with the department in the process of that one is quite far in advance, and it's actually gone through a public hearing process as well, together with the book policy, where again we've got the sector that is sitting with us in the process of development of the policy. I do want to also indicate and emphasize the fact that we were not waiting for this conference so that we can start developing policies, but we are informed by the reports that came out of the mapping studies that were done by SACO. I just want to, with this audience, also mention that the department is just starting with the music policy together with the design policy and the visual art strategy. Those are defined are identified maybe in the revised white paper as critical or priority policies that needed to be put in place. Hence, the department has commenced with the processes, albeit at different stages of development.
I think we move to the next aspect. So we'll still allow questions towards the end. But Unati, if you could, just before we go to UNCTAD, if you can just give just a few comments about the conference and the expected outcomes.
Thank you, Molini. Good afternoon, members of the media, Deputy Minister, DDG, Marisa, my colleagues in the creative economy. For the South African Cultural Observatory, it was important that we have this conference, especially after the recent COVID-19 pandemic, which has forced all of us to relook and rethink how we do business and how we carry on with our work going forward. Part of what COVID-19 has done, the pandemic itself, as I mentioned earlier on, also in my opening remarks in the morning, that it has exposed some of the catastrophes within the creative economy, and as a result is influencing decision making, that it cannot take place the same way or in the same manner it used to before we were hit by the pandemic. So we wanted to have this conference so that we can draw from the sector, from business, from government, a deeper understanding of how the sector has been affected by the pandemic, and also to draw knowledge, from the experts within the creative economy, the practitioners, the business and government and leaders, business leaders as well, on how we can actually reset and rebuild a sustainable creative economy. And for us, as the South African Cultural Observatory, together with the National Department of Sports, Arts and Culture, I think one of our greatest outcomes of this conference, it would be, our greatest win rather would be for us to be able to forge or and rebuild a creative economy that is transformed and that is going to prosper in the future, and a creative economy that will be able to be well prepared for another pandemic. Because when we went into the pandemic in 2020, by the way, I think I need to actually say this, that the creative economy was in its own pandemic already. It's still in a perpetual state of a pandemic. So for us, it's important that we have these debates here to draw knowledge and understanding and to share insight and debate and engage and consult on how we can actually rebuild it and reset it before the sector ceases to exist. Thank you, Wunen.
Thank you, Nati. If we can reserve the questions, perhaps we'll ask the questions after Dr. Henderson gives the input, because she is supposed to talk to us about the Creative Economy Outlook report, which they've done not just for touching on South Africa, but on a number of countries. Oh, Nat, so you want to add before we move there?
Yes, I'm sorry, Bonini.
Yeah.
Thank you. And this is very important, I think. The work that I've actually outlined that needs to happen in the sector, the outcomes that we're all hoping for, which is part of the reason why we have UNCTAD in the room here today, is we need partnerships. We cannot be doing this work alone. It can't be responsibility of government alone. It can't be on business alone. It can't be on the practitioners alone. We need to build these strong partnerships that will forge, a brighter and a prosperous creative economy. And it is, as UNCTAD being part of this conference, and not just a part, but a partner to this conference, along with other partners, is a step towards that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now I'll hand over to Dr. Henderson to take us through some of the key highlights of the report. Over to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for the kind invitation. And let me just bring you, first of all, I am from the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. I am from what we call it shorter for journalists. We are the United Nations Trade Agency. Okay, so we work with, our work is on 3 pillars. One is research, and this is the report, what we did now. Then we do capacity build, we do public debate, consensus building, which is what we are doing now. And then we do capacity building. So in a way, it shows what you were saying, the journalist was saying, it's not enough to have research and identify the challenges and opportunities. It's not enough to raise awareness and discuss these challenges, like what do we know. We then need to implement the policy, and this is where this is this is not exact science. It's not 2 + 2. There is a lot of things to take into account to be able to implement the policy, and capacity building is one of them. So this is what we do in UNCTAD, and in my case, we're doing it in creative industries. And we showed in the report, partnerships is very, very important. So one of the key things that we show in the report is that this is a product of partnership. Several United Nations agencies collaborated in this report. So not only UNESCO, ITC, International Trade Center, the World Trade Organization, you name it, we have several, WIPO, UNESCO, I mentioned UNESCO, WIPO, UNIDO. So we all worked together in one chapter where we show how we work together in partnership to advance the creative industries. Each of us, when I say each of us, each UN agency try to look at the creative industries in a different lens. So there is one chapter that shows the partnership that includes also the governments. So the case, the same chapter has some case studies, one of which is South Africa, and we are very honored to have been collaborating with SACO. This is an excellent case study. I will not dwell into that because we have an expert. So that was the partnership. The second thing is we focus on trade, as I mentioned. So for us, you will see that in the report we look at first of all the global picture, and that is important because while it's very important to have the national picture, it's also important to see what is the global and regional level situation. It allows us to understand the issues. Doesn't mean that we are going to have the immediate response, but understanding the global and regional issues are very important. And you will see that in the report. One of the things that you will see is that creative goods represented 3% of the total merchandise trade, which is about $500 billion. And creative services represented 21% of total services sector's exports, and that was $1 trillion in 2020. I'm talking about. Concerning the regional level, and you will see all these figures in my presentation, so if you don't get, if I'm not clear when I'm presenting it now, please consult the PowerPoint presentation I made, which is available by the organizers. South-South trade, so the regional level, is very important. And the report will shows that in 2020, South-South trade represented 40.5% of created exports by developing countries. This is an important figure, and it's also important for South Africa in particular, because one of the key markets of exports of created goods are actually in Africa. So there is a lot of South-South cooperation, and improving the regional dimension will improve exports of South Africa. The other thing that report has is we talked about COVID and how the different governments responded to COVID. There is one interesting figure, let me see if I have it here. One of the important issues, I think, it is true before, as previous speakers mentioned, it is true that before the pandemic, there was already the trade prospects were not very encouraging, and there was a decline in international trade. However, it is also true that with the pandemic, there was, suddenly we have to stop going to the theater. So the first measures of the slowdown really affected the physical goods, the physical shows that require, and you see that in the report. But you also see, which is very interesting, is that the creative exports, services exports, were more resilient during the pandemic than the trade in services in general. Meaning, we watch more Netflix than perhaps before. The digital creative services performed very well and outperformed the services exports, and you will see that in the report. Concerning the master plan that are were mentioned here, the report will show that not only South Africa but many other countries have new legislation in place, and it will show why it's so difficult to implement legislation and to arrive at a consensus for a legislation and to implement it, particularly because this is creative industries are very complex. It requires many issues. They are very different. It's not the same to talk about legislation for music that legislation for books. So while there are communalities, there is a very complex issue. So many countries are implementing and are put forward some policies. So the role of international organizations, UNCTAD, is support developing countries in these endeavors, support the implementation, support capacity building for example, what we show in the report, the trade statistics, some capacity building and training on statistics and measure the creative economies. And I will finish here. Before I finish, two more things. One is that we have updated also the database on the creative trade goods and services, trade goods and services. So anybody can go for free and also check the different countries, how they perform in trade. And at the end of my presentation, you will have the link to that. And finally, the report also has a survey on creative economies. This is information received officially from our member states, and there you will see official information in terms of studies carried out by other countries on creative industries. You will see the links. You also find not only the studies, but how they measure their creative industries, the measures they use for COVID, and I will stop here. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hansen.
Perhaps if we can take questions for her and also for Unati their questions before we get the next speaker. Are there questions? Yeah, there's a question there. Can you pass the roving mic, Angela? There's a roving mic.
Thank you so much, Dr. Henderson, for that. I think my question...
Do you want to just tell us who you are?
Oh, the name. Oh, sorry, apologies. My name is Zama Mkosi, and I just wanted to get a view whether, I'm not sure if this is covered in the report, but if you were able to measure or get a sense of policy development, you know, creative and cultural policy development within, you know, at a regional level amongst developing countries, but obviously of particular interest within the African continent. Is there a sense, is that something that you measure, is it something that you look at? How is that faring, particularly, you know, knowing that, you know, policies, you know, enable industry development, and so if there is movement there, then we're hopefully likely to see movement in terms of improvement in the actual sector performance. Any thoughts or insights that came out on the report with regards to that? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, you will find the figures for regional trade. So that in South-South trade, there is a section on South-South trade. You will be able to see that. You will also, we produce, there is a section on where we have the analysis of the survey in general, but then you can also go to the annex and you will see the analysis, the particular countries. Now, it is interesting that we've just about more or less the same time as the report was being produced, Africa, in their declaration that was mentioned by the presentation by Jen Snowball, she mentioned the strategy from Africa. So while we were writing the report, we were receiving calls from the African Union and from the Exim banks of Africa. What are we doing on creative economy? So I am hoping to be able for the next report to have a section related precisely on African Union, Africa, and the regional dimension. And I'm really hopeful that. So now we have some figures that you can see there. There is an approximation, but our hope is to be able to have a section for the 2024 report. Yes, on that.
Dr. Minister?
Thank you very much, Mbonene. I just wanted to ask Marisa a question. Probably, I think she tried to touch on it towards the end of when she was responding to the last one. There was a presentation in the plenary about creative goods and creative services that showed that there was none of the African countries that were in the top 10 on both. And knowing that their agencies and other agencies that are under UN are doing research and they are doing capacity building and all that. I just wanted to check that, having seen that everybody knows that Africa has got a wealth of culture, but of course there is little that is making it to be at the level of the other countries in the world. Are they shifting budgets to make sure that they concentrate more on Africa than other continents? That's the question I wanted to ask.
Dr. Anderson, I'm sure you'll deal with that.
Thank you. Yes, unfortunately, one of the things we mentioned in the report is that, for example, in exports of creative services, the main exporters are developed countries. So we showed in the report what are the shortcomings. So it's not just Africa, it's in general developing countries. And there is a combination of things that we show in the report. There are barriers to trade. There are lack of infrastructure in some other countries. There is maybe lack of training on IT issues, and digital is becoming very, very important. So we need to be able to help and train more people. Education on this will be very important as a recommendation. So all these shortcomings, I think, made it, even though we have incredible potential here, this is not translated into figures. There is also creative economies. We mentioned not in this report but in previous report that there are already some imbalances in the world, in trade, in so the creative economy is part of the global economy, and unfortunately COVID has shown these imbalances, exacerbated the imbalances. So during the COVID we could see clearly that the support measures that were available for some countries were not, unfortunately, available for others. So some countries fared better than others. So there are already some imbalances that, and that's what the role of, I think, we can do from the UN. We can support countries to, for example, in our organization, help governments to make full use of the GATT flexibility, the General Agreement on Trading Services, so as they can use these flexibilities to promote exports on creative services. We can help countries support their statistical departments and show them, build some capabilities on how to improve the reporting of creative services in particular, and how to measure and how to promote that. So there also, I think there are important measures that can take into account to promote entrepreneurship. So there are several recommendations that are done in the report. And I come back, I'm sorry, but to come back to this. This is a very complex sector, so we need a lot of creativity and a lot of different tools to be able to maximize the gains of the creative economy.
Thank you so much. Are there other questions?
Yes, I have a question.
Okay.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Kinilo Topela from Archives. I have a question regarding to the digital space. So, as the digital space is actually taking over, how does this conference aim to empower creators to protect their IP?
Thank you. I think any one of you can deal with that question.
I'm not going to answer the question. All I'm going to say is that there is a panel after lunch, Zama, am I correct?
Yes.
That is dealing exactly with that, because we wanted to dedicate time to the issue of the digital space and the creatives. So there's a panel that is dealing with that, and I know that I'll be part of that panel. So I won't answer now, because what I would answer is what I'm going to say in it.
So it's an encouragement to go to the panel. But for those journalists, I noticed somebody here was asking about the panel. So can you can participate virtually as well in the panel. Dr. Kumalo?
Okay, I also wanted to say, in addition to the panel discussion this afternoon, I think it's also important that, Deputy Minister, we emphasize the fact that, remember, there are two bills that are in Parliament that are speaking specifically to the issues of protection of intellectual property. Those two bills have already gone through the two houses of Parliament. They were sent back by the President. They have been I say panel beated and gone through the whole processes taken through by the parliamentary structures, and now that they've been endorsed by both houses, they are ready to go back to the President, and that really is a very enabling in our view. a creation of a very enabling environment once those two bills are actually adopted. Just wanted to add that aspect in this.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Okay, so I can't see questions here online, but so what we're going to do, we're going to share the presentation that Dr. Marisa was referring to, and we'll also make the link to the full report. The report is quite huge. We'll make a link and we'll share with all those from the media that are keen on the report. If we could just, we thought, one of the things that we've done as the South African Cultural Observatory is to do research to understand the sector in the country. And one of the researchers is Dr. Hose. He's just going to give a key highlight about, from what is called the economic mapping of the South African cultural industries. It looks at the various provinces, the various sectors and subsectors in the country. But he'll give us the key highlights. Dr. Hose.
Thanks very much. I think it's a good place to meet, where you can meet all international people and they can criticize the work that we've done and give us inputs and ideas on how to take it forward. So again, following on what Boneni has said, the report and the presentations are on the SACO website, and you can get all the details in far more detail than what we've got that I'm going to give you right now. When we looked at the mapping study, I think one of the important things that we need to highlight is that we looked at the monetary value and employment value, and we never looked at the intrinsic value of our culture. So we must never ignore the intrinsic value that we have, that makes us happy, that makes us excited about things. So we didn't measure that, but we did measure what it is in the normal terms. So we used the national accounts as a basis. So all the data that we have maps to the national accounts and is consistent. We did 5 reports, one overall capstone report, and then we looked at the provinces. But the 3 economic dimensions we looked at were the GDP, employment, and trade. So these studies are important because they do benchmark. So it tells us how we've progressed as a country. Are our sectors growing or shrinking? And then we also look at in future what's causing those shrinkages. Does tax play a role, for example, and factors like that. For this report, we've used the UNESCO classification. So they've got 6 domains: culture and heritage, performance and celebration, visual arts and crafts, books and press, audiovisual and interactive media, and design and creative services. So those first 4 are the perhaps the more traditional cultural and creative sectors, but the last 2, audiovisual and interactive media and design and creative services, are certainly important because they draw so much from the traditional creative services. So what our findings were, and I'm sure that's what you're more interested in, is we found that the contribution of those 6 domains to the GDP of South Africa is just under 3%, 2.97%. So let's call it 3%. And when you start looking at that and looking at agriculture, there's not too much difference. And I think that's important. So the cultural and creative sector need to enjoy a higher profile. So as much that we need agriculture for food security, we need the cultural and creative industries for our well-being. So it's important. So 3%, it is important. Where are these? And this was quite interesting as well. A lot of the creative sectors cluster around the metropolitan areas. So we find that almost 47% of the contribution to GDP of the creative, cultural and creative industries is in Gauteng province. 14% in KwaZulu-Natal, and then 12% in the Western Cape. So it's interesting, but a lot of the museums, a lot of the heritage is in other provinces, and I think that needs to be developed. We did also look at a lot of other economic factors that you can find in the report. We calculated the multipliers for each of those sectors. In other words, what are the backward and forward linkages? how much does each sector rely on goods that are being produced in South Africa or imported, and how much do they supply into other industries. So that's important. We also looked at the equality or inequality of the sector and how it measures with other sectors. So we looked at it from a consumption point of view. And we used the Gini coefficient, and those are also in the report. The next economic domain that we looked at was employment. So when we looked at employment, we used what's used in the international literature, the creative trident, because it's a little bit more difficult. So you have creative occupations and you have creative sectors. So in the creative, if somebody worked in the creative occupation, in the creative sector, there's about 65,000 workers in that sector. When you look at people that are in creative occupations, but in non-creative sectors, in other words, a designer that's working in an automotive plant, that's that type of person. There's about 320,000, or almost 2% of our labor force. And then you've got a lot of support occupations in the creative industries. And there's 615,000, or 3.7% of our labor force. So this gives you 6% of all jobs in South Africa, just under a million, or just around about 1 million jobs. The domain that has got the most is the visual arts and crafts, and they've got 44% of employment. And that kind of makes sense. So even though they're not a big domain when it comes to contribution to GDP, they certainly are creating jobs. Where we look where these jobs are, again, Gauteng features prominently, but with less. So 32% of the jobs are in Gauteng, and remember 46% of the GDP came from Gauteng. KwaZulu-Natal has got 18%, and the Western Cape 14%. Then we also looked at trade. Trade is kind of difficult because we've got trade in goods, which is fine, that's nice and easy. Those are well documented, and customs excise collect good statistics, and you can see what's happening there. When it comes to trade in services, that becomes a bit more tricky because a lot of these dematerialized goods are going across the border through the internet, and this presentation as it is right now could be going somewhere overseas that we wouldn't even know where it's going. So that's a little bit more difficult. So we have tracked it. It does seem like we're in a trade surplus for the first time in many years. And then what is, trade in goods, only 0.4% of our exports comprise of cultural creative goods. So when you compare it to that almost 4%, almost 3% of the GDP that's contributed and 6% of employment, it seems like trade is lagging behind. So I think following on the UNCTAD presentation and the work that they've done, I think there's a lot of work that should be done. Interestingly, when we looked at the provinces, here we found that the Western Cape contributed 53% of South Africa's exports. So it doesn't mean to say that 53% are manufactured or produced in the Western Cape. So an art gallery, for example, in the Western Cape might be responsible for that export, but the artist will be sitting in Polokwane or somewhere else. And Gauteng doesn't have that same propensity to export, so only 32% come from Gauteng and only 11% from KwaZulu-Natal. So I think when you look at the master plan, you'll see there's a big emphasis on export development and export promotion, and that is kind of important. So I've covered the three factors that we looked at from the economic point of view. I think if you can get the report, there's a lot more information, and I'm sure that we'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Host. Can I check if there are questions? Are there any questions online or questions from the floor? Okay, there's a question.
Thank you so much. Zama Mkhosi again, Dr. Hose. I think I was itching to ask this question, and right at the end you covered it. Because I wanted to ask about that Western Cape being 53% exports, and yet in terms of manufacturing activity only 12%. But I think you touched on one of the reasons, because where I wanted to get to was to not dig deeper into the reasons for that, which I'm sure we can do a whole long paper around that, but to try and see, I was particularly interested in KZN, to see what can be done and what are some of the indicators that, if one is interested in shifting KZN. I understand Gauteng, but shifting KZN to also, even if they are not, because they are only at 14%, I think that's what you said, in terms of the manufacturing activity, but also the exporting only 11%. But if one was to move them up, even by 10, 20%, not even get to 53, but what would be some of the key things that a government like KZN, because their industry is in a bit of a growth trajectory, and perhaps there's something that can be done in their province. Thanks.
Let me just check if there is another hand. Okay, if there are 2 minutes.
I wanted to come last if there's anybody else. But
Is there a hand? Not online, not on the floor? Okay.
I wanted to build up on the question that Zama has asked, particularly around KZN, just to share with the host that when I was in KZN 3 weeks ago, I had a meeting with the Premier and the Cabinet, and they were saying to me that, Deputy Minister, we actually want KZN to go through a cultural revolution. We believe that there's a lot that can be done around that. Now, that question that Zama is asking is very critical, because I must go back and sound very brilliant and be able to tell them what are the things that they can do to actually trigger that cultural revolution. They are saying it can be correct that they are trailing behind Gauteng, that the gap is so big, and that the Western Cape and all that. So it's a very important question. But my question was, generally, when you want to put a sector into a space, for instance, both at international level and at probably at global or at Africa level, and you see that there isn't much that is being done around that sector, you would put percentage. For instance, when health was not being looked well after by governments said 5% of the budget must be used on health. I'm making an example. Have we ever thought about thinking about forcing governments to say so much percentage must be used on cultural issues? Like, for instance, say for 3% of the budget, I'm making an example, must be used on culture, so that it's something that we start to talk about, and we even go as far as the UN about it, because that would also help governments in the reset that we're talking about, put it into practical forms, and saying we want all governments to understand that culture is important. I was just asking that question just to have an understanding. Has it ever come to the fore? Thank you so much.
Dr. Hoos?
Sure. We can probably talk until the end of the conference. Minister, thanks very much. I appreciate it. And it is exciting, because I think there is so much that can be done. So, Minister, you're absolutely right. Sometimes it is budget, and budget does play a critical role, but it is also to do with planning and coordination, and drawing on your strengths and eliminating your weaknesses. Now, sounding like a management consultant, but I'm an economist, so I'm not going to do that. But if we can just take the domains kind of one by one. If you look at the KZN, so I grew up in Durban, Tshwane. so I know a little, but I haven't been there for a long time. But culture and heritage. You've got so many places that can be seen. You've got the royal household, the prominent royal household, not only in South Africa but globally. How can we leverage the royal household to help us to do the marketing? So if you look at the royal household in Britain, they go there to go see the Queen. Why are we not doing something similar? We've got so rich and so much that we can do, that we can build on. Then just skipping to crafts, and this is just a silly example that we can use. There's lots of ladies that collect grass and they make baskets and they sell it for 70 Rand or 100 Rand, and they exist. But if you look at the value behind those baskets, the cultural value, we're not exploiting. We're selling the utility value of that basket. What we need to do is exploit the cultural value. So there's certain designs, there's certain colors, there's certain usages, there's certain, can we create a market for collectors of Zulu baskets? So the Native Americans, Navajo people have started doing that. And they're not getting $10 a basket, they're getting $1,000 or $2,000 a basket. And because of that, so we don't want people to exist, we want also to be uplifted. So there's a lot of those things. So it does need money, but it also needs planning and coordination. When it comes to performance and celebration, and I spoke about the long tail. So we have successful performers that come from the province, and they're making a good living. But so there's a lot of poor people that are existing doing playing music or writing plays and that. But there's a lot of rich people. How can we use those people that have won the Grammys, those people that are already on the international stage, to help lift not the rubbish talent, because there's always going to be plotters that do it. But among those in the long tail, the poor ones, there is some incredible talent. How can we identify those and exploit them? When it comes to books and press, again, KZN has got a literary heritage that it's great. How can we, I'll see Lisa Combrink here, so maybe we can speak afterwards and take it offline. Because there's international exhibitions, book fairs that we should be going to, that we are going to, I shouldn't say that we should be going to. How can we use those to exploit, to show the existing old talent, but also introducing the new talent? Audio-visual, we, Tshwane, and I forget it's the film. Yeah. What can we do? It's there. It's an asset you've got. Why? What can we do to use that asset more? And then the design and creative services. I think they're doing a lot already, and I think the same kind of thing applies there. So I think a lot of these are in the master plan. I think maybe what needs to happen is KZN needs to take that master plan and own it, and then to take the elements of the master plan that are applicable and work together with the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture and other players, and then to start exploiting and getting the opportunities.
Yeah, Dr. Kumar. I wanted just to add, perhaps not really speaking specifically to each of the domains, but just saying what we had requested SACO to also do, which they did last year, was to extrapolate the information per province. I remember Andre went and made a presentation to eThekwini municipality, I think. Yeah, but within KZN, who had requested. But we've also extended this opportunity to provinces. You know, obviously without overwhelming our counterparts. I remember they were talking about who pays for what, etc. I'm sure we'll discuss that, Unati. But I know one province has already approached us to actually get SACO into their strategic planning processes, so that as they plan, what the output of the planning is informed by it's evidence-based and informed by research. So that information is available, and I'm volunteering, Andre,
Okay.
through UNCTAD.
Through UNCTAD is
to
volunteering.
assist you, Deputy Minister,
Yes.
in sounding wise and intelligent in that.
Thank you so much.
If I can just add something that I really forgot, and I shouldn't have forgotten because we have UNCTAD sitting right here, and we discussed it earlier. So if you can take that example of the baskets, where we're going to use the royal household and get some branding of our baskets and making them added value. If we start working with other African countries, and start promoting their baskets, which are not the same as the Zulu baskets. You can create a much bigger pool of collectors. So by working together with an organization like UNCTAD, and then with the other African countries, the provinces will earn a lot more as well.
Thank you so much. I think what Dr. Kumalo was referring to, we go around the various provinces to talk about some of the results of this study, but in that particular study, it gives profile by profile for each province, and we're able to say, here in KZN, this is what seems to be what you sell the most, this is what seems to be coming out. How do you exploit it further? So the study goes into all of those things so that provinces can exploit what is probably their competitive or comparative advantages in order to benefit for the cultural sector. So those are some of the things that we look at, and as we do dissemination workshops, they want to zoom in into their specific provinces. I don't know if there are any, I haven't got any question here online. I don't know if there are any other questions, but if not, I don't know if any of the panelists here would like to just say the last word before we close, just for the benefit of people who are here and those that are online. If there's anything that you want to say just in closing. Nati?
Thank you, Manini. I just want to encourage the members of the media that are here today to please participate in the conference for the duration of today and tomorrow, because there's quite insightful, quite exciting presentations that are going to be shared by presenters both from local and our international presenters, both virtually and physically. As I mentioned earlier on during when we started with the briefing earlier, we decided on an international conference because we felt we cannot be engaging about a creative economy reset alone. Because everyone has gone through the COVID-19 pandemic and everyone has experienced it in different ways and formats, and therefore this is an opportunity for us to share insight and to share best practice, to share even the challenges that we've all faced and how each one of us have actually managed to address the crisis as it continues. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Unati. And if I may just thank everybody that has participated.
So can I just simply thank you. So I would really thank for bottom of my heart to the South African Observatory, the government of South Africa, the vision and the leadership of South African creative industries is really empowering, and I just want to thank you for this and count on UNCTAD to support you in any way we can.
Thank you so much.
And maybe just to say, Boneni, as the department, we really appreciate this conference because it actually assists us as the department and the ministry, not just to do the work just for the sake of doing it, but to actually have scientific evidence that we can, use as a base and be able to say, this is where we are because of what this conference has actually amplified in terms of doing our work better. So it's a very important conference for us. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Anybody? Okay. Perhaps, as I was saying, just to thank the members of the media that came here today and those that are participating online, and just to say, as Unati said, please participate both here in person for those that are here, but also those that may not be here. You can choose the sessions that you would like to participate in and you think you have a lot to gain from, or you can even give input. And I think on that note, we will adjourn the session, and you can send any other questions you may have, or if you are interested in interviews, please talk to us. We have Tumi there from Bright Spark, and Angela, and anybody that from our SACO team, get in touch with us, ask questions that you feel you may not have asked now, and you may want to ask them later, and we can direct them to any of the speakers here, and we'll try and get those answered. And on that note, I think we'll close the session. Thank you once more to all the speakers that came through. And I think we'll end on that note. You're welcome. Thank you.
Is it the fresh or the
No, that's fine.
No, that's fine.